So let me tell you what actually happened in the last 38 days, and I want to be very precise about this because the gap between what Washington is saying and what is actually unfolding on the ground right now is wider than anything I have seen in my years of studying American military history. Yesterday, April 8th, 2026, the United States declared victory. Secretary of War Pete Hegseth stood at a Pentagon podium and announced that Operation Epic Fury was, in his exact words, a capital V military victory. He said Iran's military had been rendered combat ineffective for years to come. He said 150 Iranian warships were at the bottom of the sea. He said 80% of Iran's air defense systems were gone. He said 90% of Iran's weapons factories had been razed to the ground. And then, just hours after that press conference ended, Iranian missiles were still flying. Gulf states were still reporting drone impacts. The Strait of Hormuz remained under Iranian military management. Iran's foreign minister was on television telling the world that the ceasefire had been achieved on Iran's terms, not America's. And J.D. Vance, the Vice President of the United States, quietly described the deal not as a victory, but as a fragile truce. So let me ask you the question that nobody in Washington is willing to ask out loud right now. If this was a complete military victory, why is America sitting across from Iran in Islamabad this Friday trying to negotiate a permanent agreement? Why does Iran still control the world's most important oil choke point? Why is the nuclear question entirely unresolved? Why did America need Pakistan to broker the ceasefire? And why did Trump accept a deal that Iran is openly describing as the acceptance of their 10-point plan, including lifting all sanctions and withdrawing all American forces from the region? Those questions do not have comfortable answers, but they are the only questions that matter right now. Because what you are watching is not the end of a war. It is the beginning of a reckoning. And I want to walk you through exactly what happened, why it happened this way, and what the next 2 weeks will reveal that changes everything. Let me start with the structure of the situation as it actually exists today, not as the White House press office describes it, because those are two very different things. And understanding the difference is the only way to understand what comes next. Structural fact number 1. America used an enormous share of its most advanced weapons in 38 days and cannot replace them quickly. This is not a political statement. This is logistics. The United States entered this conflict with approximately 2,300 JASSM-ER stealth cruise missiles in its total inventory. These are America's premier precision strike weapons, the missiles that can penetrate hardened underground facilities from long range. According to open-source estimates, over 1,000 of those missiles were expended during Operation Epic Fury. In 38 days, America burned through roughly half of its most sophisticated long-range cruise missile stockpile. The JASSM-ER takes years to produce at scale. There is no switch you can flip to replace 1,000 of them quickly. Multiple aerial refueling aircraft, the KC-135s and KC-46s that keep American jets in the fight over long distances, were damaged or destroyed throughout the campaign. Iran targeted them deliberately and systematically. Approximately 29 to 43% of all available American THAAD missile defense systems were committed to this theater. The Atlantic Council's tracking showed that an E-3 AWACS surveillance aircraft was severely damaged by an Iranian drone strike at Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia. These are the systems America uses to see the battlefield, to coordinate air operations, to manage the entire aerial war. They are irreplaceable on short notice. Now, here is what this means structurally. America went to war with Iran using an enormous percentage of the tools that cannot be quickly replenished. And at the same time, Iran, whose drone factories were dispersed across the country in basements and warehouses and underground facilities, was still launching drones at Gulf state targets right through the ceasefire announcement, still hitting pipelines, still managing the Strait of Hormuz. A country whose military had been, according to Washington, rendered combat ineffective for years to come, was still generating military pressure at the exact moment America accepted a 2-week pause. Structural fact number 2, Iran accepted a ceasefire, not a surrender. And those two things are not the same. This distinction is everything. When Japan surrendered in 1945, it was unambiguous. When Germany surrendered, the terms were dictated entirely by the victors. What happened on April 7, 2026 was different in every possible way. Iran submitted a 10-point plan through Pakistani intermediaries. That plan included lifting all American sanctions permanently. It included withdrawing all United States military forces from their bases in the region. It included Iranian control, jointly with Oman, over the management of the Strait of Hormuz. And Trump described that plan publicly as a workable basis on which to negotiate. Not a rejection, not an ultimatum, a workable basis. Iranian President Pezeshkian told his own people that the ceasefire was achieved through acceptance of Iran's core principles. That is not the language of a defeated country. That is the language of a country that believes it extracted concessions under pressure. And here is the deeper problem. Iran still has its enriched uranium. The IAEA inspectors were expelled in June 2025. Nobody has been back inside Iran's nuclear facilities to independently verify what was destroyed and what survived. America's own government reports give conflicting assessments. The 2025 National Security Strategy said the strike significantly degraded Iran's nuclear program. The 2026 National Defense Strategy said they obliterated it. Significantly degraded and obliterated are not the same word. And when Hegseth stood at that podium and said they know exactly what Iran has and they will take it, that tells you Washington does not yet have the verification that would come with a genuine surrender. Structural fact number 3, the Strait of Hormuz is still not open, and every day it stays closed, the world pays. Right now, as I speak to you, Iran's armed forces have released a statement saying they maintain strategic control and management of the Strait of Hormuz. Maersk, one of the world's largest shipping companies, said yesterday they could not yet send ships through the strait because maritime certainty does not yet exist. Oil prices fell after the ceasefire announcement, but they are still sitting at around $103 a barrel. Before this war started, oil was at approximately $70 a barrel. That is a 47% increase in energy costs that is still embedded in everything the global economy produces. Every cargo ship that reroutes around Africa adds weeks and millions of dollars to supply chains. Fertilizer components, petrochemicals, the raw materials that flow through this choke point, those disruptions compound over time. They do not heal the moment a ceasefire is announced. The economic damage of 6 weeks of Strait of Hormuz disruption will be felt in food prices, fuel prices, and industrial costs for months after any agreement is signed. Now, here is what I want you to understand about the players and what they actually want, because this is where the mainstream analysis consistently gets it wrong. What does America say it wanted from this war? It said it wanted to destroy Iran's nuclear program, eliminate its ballistic missile capability, and degrade the regime's ability to project power through proxy forces. And if you only listen to Hegseth's press conference, you might believe America achieved those objectives. But what does America actually need from what comes next? It needs the Strait of Hormuz open permanently. It needs oil prices to come down. It needs its interceptor and cruise missile stockpiles rebuilt before any future confrontation. And it needs a diplomatic outcome that can be presented domestically as a win without committing to the full set of concessions Iran is claiming were already agreed to. What does Iran say it agreed to? A 2-week ceasefire with time to finalize negotiations. What does Iran actually claim it achieved? Control of the strait, international recognition that its nuclear enrichment is a matter for negotiation rather than unilateral American demand, a path to sanctions relief, and most importantly, survival. Iran's new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, the son of Ali Khamenei, who was killed in the opening hours of Operation Epic Fury on February 28th, has publicly stated that Iran will sustain operations indefinitely if the ceasefire breaks down. That is not the statement of a government that believes it lost. That is the statement of a government that is entering negotiations from what it believes is a position of leverage. What does Israel want? Israel struck the ceasefire deal publicly by announcing Lebanon is not covered. Within hours of the ceasefire coming into effect, Israel launched what it called Operation Eternal Darkness against Lebanon, with 100 airstrikes in 10 minutes against Hezbollah positions. Israel is signaling that it is not done, that it does not consider the regional war settled, and that its objectives extend beyond what the Pakistan-brokered agreement covers. This matters enormously because every Israeli strike on Lebanon creates pressure on Iran to respond, which puts direct stress on the fragile truce that America needs to hold for the next 2 weeks. And what does Iran's 10-point plan actually demand in exchange for cooperation? Withdrawal of American military forces from all bases in the region. That is not a small ask. The United States has bases in Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, the UAE, Jordan, and multiple other locations. These bases are the foundation of American power projection in the Middle East. If America genuinely commits to withdrawing from them as part of a permanent agreement, it is not just ending this war. It is fundamentally restructuring its military posture in the world's most critical energy region. And if America refuses, Iran has a built-in justification for walking away from negotiations the moment the 2 weeks expire. Now let me give you the scenario breakdown, because the next 14 days are not just a pause in the fighting. They are the period in which the actual outcome of this war will be determined, not on the battlefield. In Islamabad, Scenario 1. The negotiations hold and produce a framework agreement. In this scenario, both sides find enough common language over the next 2 weeks to announce a broader peace process. Iran keeps its enriched uranium under some form of monitored arrangement. America keeps some version of its regional military presence, perhaps reduced. The Strait of Hormuz reopens under a maritime protocol that gives Iran a formal management role. Oil prices fall toward $80. The global economy stabilizes. Trump declares this a historic diplomatic achievement. Iran claims the sanctions relief as validation of its resistance. But here is what Scenario 1 actually means structurally. Iran emerges from a 38-day war with the most powerful military in the world as a country with recognized influence over the world's most critical energy choke point, a path to sanctions relief, and a new supreme leader who survived an attempt to decapitate the entire Iranian leadership structure. That is not a defeated country. That is a country that absorbed an extraordinary military campaign and came out of it with its core interests largely protected. Scenario 2. The ceasefire collapses within the 2-week window. And this scenario is not abstract, it is already under stress. Iran accused the United States of ceasefire violations on April 8, less than 24 hours after the agreement was announced. Israel is conducting massive strikes in Lebanon that Iran says violates the spirit of the deal. Iranian drones hit an important Saudi pipeline and struck Abu Dhabi's Habshan gas complex on the same day the ceasefire was announced. Kuwait reported 28 Iranian drone attacks in a single day while the truce was supposedly in effect. The UAE reported 35. If either side concludes that the other is using the 2-week pause to rearm and reposition rather than negotiate in good faith, the fighting resumes. And the next phase of that fighting would begin with America's most critical weapons stocks partially depleted and Iran's guerrilla production networks still functioning across a dispersed, hardened territory that has now had weeks to observe American targeting patterns. There is a third scenario that almost nobody in Washington is discussing publicly, and that is the scenario where the ceasefire holds, but the negotiations fail, where 2 weeks turn into 3, then 4, while both sides technically maintain the pause, but cannot agree on the core issues of uranium enrichment, American base presence, and sanctions. In this scenario, the war does not resume dramatically. It fades into a grinding diplomatic standoff with the strait partially open, oil prices stuck above $90, Iran claiming it won, America claiming it won, and the actual structural questions: who controls the strait, what happens to Iran's nuclear materials, what American military presence remains, none of them resolved. This is actually the most likely outcome, and it is also the most dangerous one, because it leaves the region in a permanent state of armed ambiguity that one miscalculation can reignite instantly. Now, let me make 3 specific predictions, and I want to be clear that these are not certainties. They are logical conclusions of the structural analysis. I may be wrong, but the pattern says this. Prediction 1. The nuclear question does not get resolved in 2 weeks. It does not get resolved in 2 months. The IAEA is not back inside Iran's facilities. America and Iran disagree about what was destroyed and what survived. Iran claims it retains the right to enrich uranium. America says zero enrichment. Hegseth said yesterday that they know what Iran has and will take it if necessary. That kind of language does not lead to a signed agreement on a 2-week timeline. The nuclear issue is the core issue, and it has been unresolvable for over 2 decades. A 6-week air campaign did not make it more resolvable. It made both sides more entrenched. Prediction 2. American military presence in the Gulf begins to contract in the next 6 to 12 months, whether or not a formal agreement is signed. This is about resources and political will, not intention. The United States burned through enormous weapons stockpiles in 38 days. Rebuilding those stockpiles takes years. The political appetite in America for sustaining maximum military presence in a region where a costly war just ended with a fragile and disputed outcome is not high. Trump built his entire political identity around not getting America into endless Middle Eastern wars. The pressure to reduce the footprint, to declare the mission accomplished and bring forces home is going to build very quickly once the immediate crisis fades. Iran knows this. Its 10-point plan was written for exactly this dynamic. Prediction 3. The ceasefire's most important consequence is not military. It is financial. Iran is reportedly finalizing a maritime protocol with Oman that would institutionalize Iran's coordinated management of tanker traffic through the Strait of Hormuz as a standing bilateral agreement. If that protocol is signed, it embeds Iranian authority over the world's most important energy choke point into a recognized international framework, not temporary crisis management, a permanent institutional role. That changes the global energy architecture. It changes how every country that depends on Persian Gulf oil calculates its relationship with Tehran. It changes what it means to have influence in the Middle East. And it happens not through military victory, but through the diplomatic consequence of a war that neither side decisively won. Let me bring this to the core question, the question that the title of this video asks: can America win this war? Here is how I would define winning. If winning means destroying Iran's ability to manufacture advanced missiles and drones in the near term, America appears to have achieved significant, though not complete, degradation. The numbers from General Kane are real, even if Hegseth's characterization was inflated. 90% of weapons factories struck, 450 ballistic missile storage facilities hit, 80% of air defense systems destroyed. Those are genuine military achievements. But if winning means forcing Iran into a position where America dictates the terms of a new regional order, that has not happened. Iran's new supreme leader is still in power. Iran's 10-point plan is described by Trump as a workable basis for negotiation. Iran still has its enriched uranium stockpile and is claiming the right to enrichment. The Strait of Hormuz is still under Iranian military management as of this morning. Iran's demand for American military withdrawal from the region is on the table in Islamabad this Friday. These are not the conditions of a defeated power accepting terms from a victor. These are the conditions of a negotiation between two sides that both believe they have leverage. Here is the deepest structural reality. America is the most powerful country in the history of the world in terms of raw military capability. That is simply true. But military power and the ability to convert military power into the political outcomes you want are not the same thing. Rome had the most powerful military in the ancient world. It never fully pacified Parthia. Britain had the most powerful navy in history. It lost the American colonies. The Soviet Union had a massive military machine. It could not hold Afghanistan. Power and control are different things, and the question of who controls the Strait of Hormuz, who has authority over Iranian nuclear materials, and what the American military footprint in the region looks like in 5 years is a question that will be answered in Islamabad and in the diplomacy that follows, not in the damage assessments from 38 days of airstrikes. What happens next is the real story, not what happened, what the next 2 weeks produce, because the fragile truce, as J.D. Vance described it, is not a conclusion. It is a decision point. Either the parties find a framework that actually resolves the core questions, or they don't. And if they don't, the world goes back to a situation where oil is above $100, where shipping through the strait is uncertain, where Iran has survived a major American military campaign with its government intact and its regional claims unresolved, and where America has partially depleted the weapon systems it would need to resume operations. That is not a situation that favors a quick return to military pressure. And Iran's leadership understands that arithmetic precisely. They have been studying it for years. The question is not whether America's military is powerful. It is. The question is whether military power alone was sufficient to change the strategic equation in Iran's neighborhood permanently. And everything we are watching today, the fragile truce, the Iranian missiles still flying, the disputed ceasefire terms, the unresolved nuclear question, the Strait of Hormuz still under Iranian management, all of it suggests the answer to that question is still being written. And what gets written in Islamabad this Friday will tell you more about who actually came out of this war ahead than anything Pete Hegseth said at a Pentagon podium yesterday. This is not prophecy. This is structural analysis. It may be wrong, and if it is wrong, we will come back and examine exactly where the logic failed. Because the goal here is never to be right about everything. The goal is to look at the evidence, follow the structural logic wherever it leads, and resist the temptation to accept any government's press conference as the final word on what actually happened.